Welcome to Real Time Recorded. I'm here with Zeus. How are you, Zeus?
Hey Dave, how are you?
I'm all right. Today we're going to talk about Talkdesk. They announced that they raised how much? $230 million, I think it was, and with a new valuation, this is a Series D fundraising, and they has a valuation of 10 million, no, $1 billion. I got to do my Dr. Evil there. $10 billion. What do you think of that, Zeus?
Yeah, and I thought we do Talkdesk, which is why I wore Talkdesk purple, I guess. Um,
There you go.
I talked to Tiago Paiva, their CEO, about this, and I asked him when the valuation was done, and he said prior to the Zoom acquisition of Five9. So had it been after, I imagine that the valuation would have been more than that, because if you assume they're worth 2/3 of Five9, then the revenue would be something like 400 million, which I don't think it quite is. So that,
Well,
yeah,
so that's the big question I've been
yeah,
getting is, is it really worth $10 billion? And the answer to that, as you just indicated, we kind of need to know a little bit about the revenue. We don't know the revenue; it's a private company. But I've been asking around different experts, different competitors, different analysts, and it seems like that. They're somewhere around the 150 to 200 million range, so we're talking somewhere between like 50 and 60 times multiple, which is pretty darn impressive.
yeah.
And so that begs the first question to talk about is Talkdesk a $10 billion company? What do you think, Zeus?
Yeah, I think they are. If you believe the TAM of the contact center industry is going to continue to grow, right? In the Five9 acquisition, they had listed a TAM at $24 billion. I did some back of the envelope math, and added a number of other users, salespeople, marketing people, people that aren't traditional contact center users, and then also increased the ASPs based on AI. And I think the TAM's actually closer to 50 billion, in about a 5-year period. So in that case, I would say they are. Their growth rate's going to continue to be, in the in the mid double digits, probably, my guess is 30-40% over the next few years. They got a ton of innovation coming, and they're appealing to a lot more users, right? So I think, from that standpoint, yeah, they probably are worth that. I think the best, pure play, private pure play out there. If somebody wanted to pony up all the money and buy something, you'd get a fully baked solution with a, good product and a good customer base.
Well, if someone wanted me to do a 50 to 60 times investment, an investment on that kind of multiple, you got to come to, in my opinion, two key conclusions or two key assumptions. One is that the market's growing. That's what you just said with the TAM. I agree with that. I think the market's growing, and the idea of the contact center is bigger now that it's as a service, bigger than it was when it was premises based, which had a lot of barriers to entry and for the customer. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for market expansion. The other key assumption is that the vendor landscape will narrow. That's a reasonable assumption by itself. The question is, will Talkdesk be one of the few that survive? Most markets kind of end up with two major players like Coke, Pepsi, or Ford, Chevy, whatever. And right now, the last Magic Quadrant, which also came out this week, has 12 viable, strong providers. Now, admittedly, it was 13 last year, so it is going to probably continue to narrow. And so the question is, will it get down to just a few dominant players, probably over time? And will Talkdesk be one of them? That creates there's certainly a scenario where that could happen, but there's also some scenarios where that won't happen, and there's a lot of creativity there. So I guess that becomes the next question is, can Talkdesk be one of the major players in this sector? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and by the way, the Ford Chevy comparison is interesting because the most valuable car company is Tesla, right? And
Well,
yeah,
just yeah, and so that's the disruptive factor,
yeah,
and that's what we're seeing with CCAS. And so but even after a disruptive factor, it'll presumably be a couple of EV companies, and so that's that's creating the window of opportunity, definitely.
yeah. And so, can they be one of the major players? All our major players were once not major players, right? You look in the chip space, NVIDIA's run over Intel now, and things like that. And I do think the real disruptive vendor to watch in this space is AWS. They kind of fly under the radar still, but the way they price and things like that, and their ability to ramp up innovations fast just because of their size. But Talkdesk really does seem to have their innovation engine going. They got a good executive team. One of the criticisms of Tiago historically was that he was a bit of a control freak, but as he's needed to bring executives in, he's done that, right? So he didn't really feel the need to go, full force in marketing. So he had never hired a CMO until he hired, Kathy, and now he brought in Sydney Carey to be the CFO, and you can sense that there's something in the works, right? If they're hiring a CFO, they're probably eyeing IPO in a couple of years. Maybe they're looking at doing some acquisitions, things like that. But once the financial complexity gets bigger, then you need that. So they've got all.
I don't think they needed a CFO. If I had $230 million in my wallet that I didn't have before, I would just put it all in crypto. I'd be done with that. But obviously, an IPO is certainly one outcome. Another outcome is they're going to try to outmaneuver everybody. It's interesting you mentioned AWS, because AWS is obviously, or Amazon's a huge company. And right now, those 12 providers I just mentioned, those are just the ones that are in the Magic Quadrant. There's actually a lot more providers that aren't on the Magic Quadrant because of their inclusion criteria. But there's a lot of providers in this space, and none of them are dominant right now. And so there's going to be a lot of stuff, and I think there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff within the 12 that are already on that Magic Quadrant. And there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff that aren't of companies that aren't on the Magic Quadrant. I mean, we haven't seen Microsoft get in this space yet. We haven't seen Salesforce directly get into this space. Oracle's a wild card. Twilio's not even in that Magic Quadrant, and they're actually shaking up the space. So I think we're in early innings of this game, and there's a lot to change. So the IPO play is interesting because that would be probably a little more shorter term than the way I'm thinking of the market might play out over the next 5-6 years. But in any case, it's certainly interesting. It's great to see that kind of valuation. They also mentioned that they were on that Cloud 100, which are private companies. And what's most interesting about that Forbes 100, Cloud 100, is that the valuation of those companies has about doubled since last year. So we're definitely seeing a lot of inflated values. The question is, are those sustainable or not? But anyway, I think we've covered this topic. You got anything else to say before we wrap it up, Zeus?
No, I think it's good for a whole industry. Right now, I think it's certainly there's a rising tide, and I think that when you look at all those Magic Quadrant players, Dave, if I asked you which one of them is the leader, Avaya and Cisco also aren't on there, right? So you're right, there are a lot of vendors. By the quadrant, you would say that Nyson and Contact are the two leaders, and Talkdesk is a strong three, but there isn't like a de facto standard leader. And I think that just leaves the door wide open to anybody. And so the round of funding, actually, I think they could use to really accelerate what they're doing from the innovation side. So it's to me, the landscape's wide open.
All right. Well, that wraps up this episode, and we'll be back next week.